The Chinese have so much resource available to carry out this kind of activity. And a country like the UK, and indeed any other major European state, doesn't have the same level of resource to be able to counter it. So we're into a really difficult and challenging time in this respect.
How serious is this threat? Let's talk to Brian Lord, who is the former Deputy Director for Intelligence and Cyber Operations at the government's Communications Headquarters, GCHQ. Good evening to you, Brian.
Good evening. How are you today?
I'm fine. Delighted to have you with us. What do you make of what we've just heard today from Dan Jarvis and those warnings that have been issued to parliamentarians?
Well, I think it's very welcome. The activity that he described and the activity that was disclosed today by MO5 is become relatively common, and it is big, and it's increasing at a scale. So I think there were two reasons behind this. One was, of course, to let parliamentarians, and this is just the angle around parliamentarians, of course, let parliamentarians know exactly what was happening. But secondly, which I think is most important, is that by putting this statement out and providing the information available and make that public, it's demonstrating to the Chinese quite clearly that their tactics in this particular methodology are well understood and well known, which in and of itself may well then start becoming a deterrent to the Chinese using that. But let's be clear on this. The Chinese have so much resource available to carry out this kind of activity. And a country like the UK, and indeed any other major European state, doesn't have the same level of resource to be able to counter it. So we're into a really difficult and challenging time in this respect.
When you look at some of the details that we've been given, we've got two accounts on LinkedIn with people posing as headhunters, getting in touch with people using not particularly fluent English to try to entice them with lucrative deals. I mean, it doesn't look that sophisticated, does it? But is that just part of what we're seeing here?
That's absolutely right. It isn't particularly sophisticated. It's the kind of bottom layer of how do you first engage a number of people in order to take them on a journey, filter them, decide which ones are worth keeping, which ones are worth really putting some time and effort in. So I think that the Chinese, in most of their approaches, whether it's this kind of approach or whether it's the wider area of data theft, can be quite unsophisticated and noisy because they do it at scale. But when they get really to the top end, they're very sophisticated and very smart because they put so much effort in. And I think, once again, the two profiles that were identified today are only two of what are hundreds, possibly thousands, doing exactly the same thing. And not just around parliamentarians, but around our defence sector, around our science and technology sector. So it's happening at real large scale.
And what sort of information are they after? Is this just about, as we saw in the previous cases which collapsed against two alleged Chinese spies, is it just about a bit of gossip, who's up, who's down, who's likely to be behind any kind of leadership contest and so on? Or do you think they are actually trying to get hold of some really serious secret material?
So I think there are a number of strands to that. First of all, it is about developing relationships that can evolve, which allows the Chinese state to actually influence decision makers of powers. That's why the parliamentary issue is so key. So one, it's about how do they actually get access to, with the ability to influence long-term future policy making around China, around our trade policy, and so on and so forth. In the meantime, yes, how much information can they get? Is it gossip? A little bit. Is it more sensitive information? A little bit. They quite often get people to write geopolitical think pieces which expose what they know. And there are two elements of that. Even little bits of gossip, small bits of information within that sense. Remember, we're living in a very highly sophisticated digital age. The Chinese are highly sophisticated in that sense. And so pooling just millions and millions of pieces of data and being able to farm that, being able to pull it together using AI technology, machine learning technology, can provide an awful lot of insight. But the parliamentarian thing is more about gaining access to influence rather than necessarily stealing secrets. I think when they look at other sectors, that's more around stealing data, stealing information, stealing research. But the parliamentarian thing is probably more about gaining influence rather than actually getting secret documents mailed to them, which just wouldn't happen.
And when you see that this has got to such a state that we've had to have these public warnings today, do you think that the government should change its approach to the threat posed by China? We've had all these discussions, haven't we, about whether it is a significant challenge, a serious threat, and so on. And that actually seemed to make a difference in the case that collapsed against those two alleged Chinese spies beforehand. I mean, is the government taking this seriously enough?
Well, I think that's an extremely challenging question, primarily because does this activity represent a national security threat to the UK? Yes, of course it does. As a security professional, somebody who comes from a national security background, somebody who works in the intelligence security industry, do I think the UK government are doing enough from that perspective? No, I don't. I think they could also always do more. That said, I'm not a macroeconomic expert, and therefore the other dimension the UK government has to consider is what are our other relationships with China. So I think what we've seen in the raft of measures that Dan Jarvis exposed today was probably doing a lot more around deterrence and disruption. In other words, a lot more around treating the problem, because treating the cause, i.e. China, suddenly becomes a lot more difficult to wrangle with and takes a lot more. So the agencies themselves, as MI5 have demonstrated again today, their job is just go after and disrupt and stop these things happening while those wider policy decisions evolve. But it's happening very slowly, and I think this is just part of raising the awareness of the scale.
And given all of that, should the government give the go-ahead for this huge new super embassy, given that there have been so many concerns raised about how it could enable the Chinese to really extend their spying operations in this country, which we know now that they are really trying to do all the time?
Yes, I think this is a real challenge. I think once again, given the location of it down in the city, given the location of it where it sits in terms of our critical national infrastructure, I think it's getting to the point within the wider debate that decision would probably create a lot of domestic political problems for the government at the moment. And I think what they have to work out is once again, it's within these wider policy decisions, what would be the impact on China with our relationship with China if we did that, weighed against what are the potential national security implications.
Brian Lord, really good to have your insight. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Brian Lord is a former Deputy Director for Intelligence and Cyber Operations at the government's Communications Headquarters, GCHQ.